What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about death, about what comes after, about whether the people we've lost are really gone. 3 years ago, I would have called myself crazy for believing any of this. 3 years ago, I still prayed sometimes, still went to church on Easter, still wore my wedding ring even though Sarah had been in the ground for 6 months. 3 years ago, I was a man going through the motions of living, fixing things with my hands because I couldn't fix what was broken inside me. But that night, on Route 491, everything I thought I understood about this universe, about God, about the afterlife, all of it shattered and reassembled into something so much stranger and more beautiful than anything I'd been taught in Sunday school. I need you to hear this story. I need you to know what he told me. This being from somewhere beyond our little corner of existence. Because if you've lost someone, if you've ever stood at a grave and felt that crushing certainty that they're just gone, just erased from the universe, you need to know the truth, and the truth will shock you. It shocked me. It's still shocking me. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this from. And if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that made you question everything you thought was real, share that story too. Hit subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you is just the beginning. There's so much more they don't want us to know. Let me take you back to that night. September 28th, 2:43 in the morning, according to the clock in my truck. I remember because I kept looking at it, kept thinking about how I should be home, should be in bed, should be anywhere but driving through the high desert outside Dove Creek, Colorado, with my eyes burning from exhaustion and my third cup of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. The harvesting season had just ended, and I'd been putting in 16-hour days fixing combines and tractors for farms all over Montezuma County. I'm a mechanic, have been for 34 years. Anything with an engine, anything with moving parts, I can fix it. It's what I do. It's what I've always done. After Sarah died, it's the only thing that made sense anymore. You can diagnose a mechanical problem. You can see what's broken, replace the part, and watch it work again. If only grief worked that way. The highway was empty that time of night, just a ribbon of asphalt cutting through scrubland and darkness. No moon. Just stars, more stars than you can imagine if you've never been out in the real empty places of the American West. They looked like someone had taken a paintbrush, loaded with silver, and just splattered it across black canvas. The kind of sky that makes you feel small. The kind of sky that used to make me feel connected to something bigger. Used to. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and I could see my breath fogging the windshield every time I exhaled. The heater in my '03 Silverado worked about as well as everything else in my life intermittently, and only when it felt like it. I had the window cracked to keep myself alert, and the cold wind smelled like diesel and dust, and the particular dry earth scent of Colorado high country in early fall. I was maybe 30 miles from home when I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was another truck pulled over with hazards on. We look out for each other out here. It's not the kind of place where you drive past someone who might need help. Cell service is spotty, and the nearest town could be an hour in any direction. So I started slowing down, moving toward the shoulder. But as I got closer, I realized the lights weren't right. They weren't the steady blink of hazards or even the rotating colors of emergency vehicles. These lights pulsed, shifted through colors. I don't have names for blues that were too bright, purples that seemed to vibrate in the air itself, and they weren't on the road. They were off to the side, maybe 200 yards out into the scrubland. I could see scorch marks on the earth, long dark trails like something had crashed and skidded. The smell hit me when I opened the truck door, ozone, sharp and electric, like the air after lightning strikes close by. But underneath that was something else, metallic and foreign, almost like copper but not quite. It made my teeth ache. I should have kept driving. I should have called someone, anyone. But my mechanic brain was already working. already cataloging what I was seeing. Something had crashed, something was damaged, and damaged things need fixing. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat and my toolbox from the bed. Don't ask me why I took the toolbox. Instinct, maybe. 34 years of muscle memory telling me that if something's broken, you're going to need tools. I started walking toward the lights. The ground crunched under my boots, dried grass and loose rock. My breath came out in white puffs. The lights got brighter as I approached, and I could make out a shape now. Something massive and metallic, partially buried in the earth. It wasn't smooth. There were angles and curves that didn't make sense together, geometry that seemed to shift when you looked at it directly, panels of what might have been metal but moved like liquid in the pulsing light, and it was humming, low and deep. A vibration I felt in my chest, in my bones, like standing next to a massive generator, the kind of sound you don't hear so much as experience. That's when I saw him. He was on the far side of the craft, or ship, or whatever it was. Tall, maybe 7 feet if he was standing fully upright, but he was bent over an exposed panel, working at something with movements that were too fluid, too graceful to be human. The light from the craft illuminated him, and I could see that his skin, if it was skin, had a faint luminescence to it, like he was lit from within. I froze. Just completely stopped moving. My brain was trying to process what my eyes were seeing and failing spectacularly. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. I was hallucinating from exhaustion, or having a stroke, or had driven off the road and was dying in my truck, and this was some kind of dying dream. But the cold wind was real. The smell of ozone was real. The weight of the toolbox in my hand was real. He turned and looked at me. I'll never forget that moment. His eyes, if they were eyes, were larger than human eyes, darker, and they reflected the pulsing light of the craft like pools of deep water. We stared at each other across maybe 30 feet of scorched earth, and I waited for my life to end. This is it, I thought. This is how Marcus Webb dies, alone on a highway in Colorado, looking at something that shouldn't exist. But he didn't attack. He didn't even move toward me. Instead, he gestured, and it was such a human gesture, so filled with frustration and exhaustion, that it almost made me laugh. He pointed at the exposed panel, then at some kind of conduit that was sparking and damaged, then spread his hands in a gesture that clearly meant, "This is broken, and I don't know how to fix it." It was the most universal gesture in existence. The same way a farmer looks at a dead tractor. The same way I must have looked at Sarah's car the day the transmission finally gave out, and I knew I couldn't save it. The look of someone facing a problem they can't solve alone. And without thinking, without any rational thought at all, I heard myself say, "Let me see it." My voice sounded strange in the electric air, small and human. I started walking toward him, toward this being that couldn't exist, toward this craft that defied every law of physics I understood. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. But I walked forward anyway. He didn't move as I approached, just watched me with those dark, reflective eyes. I set my toolbox down on the ground near the exposed panel and looked at what he'd been working on. And here's the thing that still amazes me. I understood it. Not completely, not the physics or the engineering behind it. But I could see the problem. There was a severed connection, a conduit that should have been carrying some kind of energy or fluid or both. And it had ruptured. The metal, if it was metal, had crystallized and cracked. Whatever was supposed to flow through it was leaking out in small sparks of light that dissipated into the air. I looked up at him. He looked down at me. And I swear, in that moment, we understood each other perfectly. Two mechanics looking at a broken machine in the middle of the night, miles from anywhere, with no one else to help. I opened my toolbox and got to work. I've repaired a lot of strange things in my 34 years as a mechanic. I once kept a 1967 Ford pickup running with duct tape and a coat hanger for 3 months, until the owner could afford proper parts. I fixed farm equipment so old the manufacturer went out of business in the 50s. I've improvised solutions with whatever was on hand because out here, you learn to make do or you don't survive. But I'd never tried to repair a spaceship with a crescent wrench and electrical tape. The being, I didn't know what to call him, yet worked on one side of the panel while I worked on the other. His tools, if that's what they were, looked like nothing I'd ever seen. Smooth rods that glowed at one end, instruments that seemed to bend light around them, things that hummed and vibrated in his long-fingered hands. My tools were steel and rubber, grease-stained and familiar, bought from hardware stores and truck stops across Colorado. Somehow, it didn't matter. He would gesture to a connection point, and I'd understand what needed to be bridged. I'd point to a structural stress fracture, and he'd seal it with something that looked like liquid light, hardening instantly into something stronger than the original material. We fell into a rhythm. The kind of rhythm that happens when two people who know their craft work together without needing to explain every step. The night air grew colder. My breath came out in clouds. My fingers went numb, but I kept working. The craft's humming changed pitch occasionally, and each time it did, the being would pause, tilt his head as if listening, then adjust something I couldn't see. It reminded me of the way I'd listen to an engine, hearing problems in the sound that others couldn't detect. I don't know how long we'd been working, maybe an hour, maybe less, when I finally spoke again. "Does it have a name?" I asked, nodding toward the craft. "Your ship, I mean. We name our vehicles sometimes, boats especially. Seems like something this important should have a name." I didn't expect an answer. I was just talking to fill the silence, the way I used to talk to Sarah while I worked in the shop, and she'd bring me coffee and sit on the stool by the workbench, reading her mystery novels and keeping me company. But then something happened that I still can't fully explain. I felt words in my head that weren't mine. Not a voice exactly, more like thoughts appearing fully formed, like memories of a conversation I'd never had. It translates poorly to your language. The closest meaning would be the vessel of returning home. I nearly dropped the wrench I was holding. My hands started shaking again. The being he'd paused his work and was looking at me with what I can only describe as gentle patience. You're in my head," I said. My voice came out hoarse, frightened. "Not in the way you fear. I am sharing meaning. Your language is unknown to me. But intention, emotion, concept, these are universal. You understand me not because I speak your words, but because some truths need no translation." I sat back on my heels, staring at him. The pulsing light from the craft painted his face, if it was a face in shifting shades of blue and violet. He was alien, completely and utterly foreign to everything I knew, and yet there was something in the way he held himself, some quality of presence, that felt almost familiar. "Who are you?" I asked. "What are you? A traveler? A student? A being much like yourself, Marcus Webb, trying to understand this strange and beautiful universe we find ourselves in? You know my name. I know many things about you. Your name was Easy. It is written on the badge on your shirt and on the registration papers in your vehicle. But I also know the weight you carry. I can feel it radiating from you like heat from a star. Grief, loss, the particular pain of one who has loved deeply and lost that love to the boundary you call death." The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned away, focusing hard on the conduit in front of me, blinking back tears that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. My throat tightened. "Don't," I said. "Don't talk about that. I apologize." Among my kind, such observations are not intrusive. Pain acknowledged is pain shared, and pain shared becomes bearable. But I forget that your species guards its wounds more carefully. We worked in silence for a while after that, I tightened connections, rerouted what I could, used my limited earthly materials to bridge gaps in his advanced technology. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Maybe the universe has a sense of humor. Maybe some problems are simple enough that even primitive tools and alien instruments can solve them together. But the silence was heavy now, weighted with things unsaid. And despite my better judgment, despite every instinct telling me to leave certain doors closed, I found myself talking. Her name was Sarah, I said quietly, my wife. 32 years we were married. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. It took her piece by piece until there wasn't enough left to keep going. I paused, swallowing hard. The being had stopped working and was listening with complete attention. I sat with her at the end, I continued, held her hand. She was so thin I could feel every bone. She looked at me and said she wasn't afraid, that she'd see me again, that this wasn't goodbye. She believed that with everything she had, heaven, eternal life, all of it, she had faith. The past tense in your words carries great weight. I don't know what I believe anymore, I admitted. I used to believe what she believed. Used to pray, used to think there was a plan, a purpose, something beyond all this. But when she died, when I watched her take her last breath and felt her go from warm to cold in my arms, I couldn't make sense of it. What kind of God needs good people to suffer like that? What kind of plan requires that kind of pain? I was crying now, tears running down my face, dripping onto the alien metal in front of me. 3 years of grief that I'd bottled up, pushed down, tried to bury under work and exhaustion and the daily mechanics of staying alive. I just want to know where she is, I said, and my voice broke on the words. Is she somewhere? Is she just gone? Erased? Did everything she was, everything we had together just stop? Because I can't accept that. But I can't believe in the alternative either. So I'm just stuck here, fixing broken things because I can't fix this. The being was quiet for a long moment. The craft hummed around us. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Then he moved closer, and when he spoke or shared meaning, or however you want to describe it, his presence in my mind felt warm, compassionate, almost infinitely patient. Marcus Webb, he began, and somehow my name in his communication felt important, honored. What I am about to share with you may comfort you or confuse you, or both. But you have asked a question that deserves an answer, and you have helped me when you had no reason to do so beyond simple kindness. So I will tell you what I know of death, of consciousness, of what your species calls the afterlife. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing grease across my face. Okay, I said, I'm listening. The first truth is this. Consciousness does not end. It cannot end. It is not a product of your physical form, but something far more fundamental to the fabric of reality itself. Your scientists are beginning to understand this. They call it quantum consciousness, non-locality of mind. But they are like children describing an ocean by examining a single drop of water. He gestured to the stars above us. When your wife Sarah died, her physical form ceased, yes. The chemical processes stopped. The neurons fell silent. But the consciousness that animated that form, the essential pattern that made her uniquely herself, that did not stop, it transformed. It expanded. It moved into a state of being that exists alongside your physical reality but is not limited by it. Heaven? I asked. Are you talking about heaven? The concepts your religions call heaven and hell are crude maps of something far more complex. They are attempts to describe states of being, frequencies of existence that your limited sensory apparatus cannot detect while you remain bound to physical form. But they are real, Marcus Webb. More real in some ways than the physical world you perceive. He held up one of his tools, and it began to emit different colors of light, red, blue, green, colors I couldn't name. Your eyes perceive certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation and call it visible light. But there are frequencies above and below what you can see: infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves, gamma rays. They are no less real for being invisible to you. Your wife exists now in a frequency of consciousness that you cannot perceive while you remain in physical form. But she exists. She is. And she is closer to you than you imagine. My heart was pounding. I wanted to believe this so badly it physically hurt, but I'd been disappointed before. Faith had failed me before. "How do you know this?" I asked. "How can you be sure?" "Because my people have studied this for longer than your species has had language. We have instruments that can detect consciousness the way your instruments detect light and sound. We have learned to navigate the spaces between physical and non-physical existence. We have spoken with those you would call the dead. Though that term is so profoundly wrong, it causes us discomfort." He paused, and I felt something like sadness emanating from him. "I have lost those I loved as well, Marcus Webb. The pain of perceived separation is not unique to humans, but I know not believe, but know that the bonds of love transcend the boundary of physical death. Love is not an emotion or a chemical reaction. It is a force, as real and measurable as gravity or electromagnetism. It connects consciousness across dimensions, across states of being. The grief you feel is not evidence of Sarah's absence. It is evidence of a connection so strong that even death cannot sever it." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Everything in me wanted to accept what he was saying. But years of doubt held me back. "If she's so close," I finally managed, "why can't I feel her? Why does it feel like she's just gone?" "Because you are not listening in the right way. You expect to perceive her with the same senses you used when she was in physical form: sight, sound, touch. But she no longer communicates through those channels. She exists in the space between thoughts, in the sudden memory that brings comfort, in the dreams where she seems more real than the waking world, in the moments when you feel inexplicably at peace for no reason you can name." The tears were flowing freely now. I wasn't even trying to stop them. "She has been with you all along, Marcus Webb. Every moment you spent in your workshop, working with your hands, finding solace in fixing broken things, she was there. Every night you looked at the stars and felt small and alone, she was there. The problem is not that she is absent. The problem is that grief has made you deaf to her presence." "How do I hear her again?" I whispered. How do I know it's real and not just wishful thinking?" He reached out then, and one long finger touched my chest, right over my heart. I felt warmth spread through me, like sunlight after a long winter. Faith is not about believing the right doctrines or following the right rules. Faith is about remaining open to what you cannot see, trusting in connections that transcend physical proof. Your wife had this. She knew at the end that death was not an ending but a transformation. She tried to give you that knowing. Perhaps now you are ready to receive it. We stood there in the cold desert night, this impossible being and this broken mechanic, and something shifted in me. I can't describe it better than that. It was like a door I'd locked 3 years ago had suddenly opened, and light was streaming through. The repair work continued, but everything had changed. My hands were steadier. The cold didn't bite as deep. And when I looked up at the stars now, they didn't seem distant and indifferent. They seemed like distant relatives, part of the same vast family of existence that held Sarah and me, and this strange traveler who'd crashed into my life at 2043 in the morning on an empty Colorado highway. "Do you have a name?" I asked as we reconnected the final conduit. "Something I can call you?" Among my kind, names are complex, but there is a designation that translates closest to your concept of names. In your language, the nearest approximation would be Ezra. Ezra, I repeated. It felt right somehow. Ancient and foreign and familiar all at once. The craft's humming changed pitch, rising from that deep bass throb to something higher, more stable. Lights that had been pulsing began to glow steady. Ezra placed his hand on the panel, and I felt rather than heard his satisfaction. It will hold. You have helped me return home, Marcus Webb, and in return, perhaps I have helped you begin the journey toward finding yours. The craft was coming back to life. I could feel it in the way the air around us changed, the way the humming shifted from labored and uneven to smooth and powerful. The lights stabilized into a soft, steady glow that painted the desert scrubland in shades of blue and silver. My work here was done. Our work was done. But I didn't want him to leave yet. There was so much more I needed to know, so many questions crowding my mind like birds trying to escape a cage all at once. "Wait," I said, and Ezra turned those dark, reflective eyes back to me. "You said love is a force. You said consciousness doesn't end. But what about everything else? What about sin and judgment and heaven and hell? What about God? Was any of it real, or have we just been telling ourselves stories for thousands of years?" Ezra was quiet for a moment, and I felt him considering how to answer, how to translate concepts that existed beyond my language, beyond my framework of understanding. "Your religions are not wrong, Marcus Webb, but they are incomplete. They are like maps, drawn by people who have never traveled beyond their own village, trying to describe a continent they have only glimpsed from a distant hilltop. The truths they contain are real, but the details are distorted by the limitations of human perception and the agendas of human institutions." He moved closer to the craft, running his hand along its surface with something like affection, the way I'd touched the hood of a truck I'd just brought back from the dead. "There is a source," he continued, "a consciousness so vast and fundamental that it underlies all of existence. You might call it God. My people have other names. Some civilizations call it the field, the unity, the eternal present. The name matters less than the understanding that everything, every particle of matter, every spark of consciousness, every moment of time emerges from and returns to this source." "So there is a God," I said, trying to grasp what he was telling me. "There is something infinitely greater than what your religions have imagined. Not a being who judges and punishes, not a father figure sitting on a throne counting sins, but a field of infinite consciousness, infinite love, infinite creative potential. You exist within it right now, Marcus Webb. You have never been separate from it. Separation is the illusion. Connection is the truth." He turned back to me, and I felt the weight of his attention, the depth of his compassion. "What you call heaven is not a place you go to if you are good enough. It is a state of consciousness, a frequency of being where you experience direct connection to the source, unfiltered by the distortions of physical existence. What you call hell is not a place of eternal punishment. It is a state of self-imposed separation, where consciousness becomes trapped in patterns of fear, hatred, and guilt, unable to perceive its own connection to the whole." "So we judge ourselves?" I asked. "When we die, we just go to whatever state of being we've earned?" "Not earned, created. Consciousness is creative by nature. What you believe, what you hold as true in the deepest parts of yourself, this shapes your experience of reality, both in physical form and beyond it. Those who die believing they are sinful and deserving of punishment may indeed experience something like hell, not because they are being punished, but because they cannot accept forgiveness, cannot open themselves to the love that surrounds them, always." The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, just the faintest suggestion of dawn turning the black sky to deep blue. We'd been out here for hours, and I hadn't noticed the time passing at all. "What about Sarah?" I asked, and my voice shook on her name. "Where is she now? What state is she in?" Ezra tilted his head, and I had the strange impression he was perceiving something I couldn't see, looking into dimensions invisible to my human senses. She is in a state of profound peace and expanding awareness. The love she cultivated in life, the kindness she practiced, the faith she held even in suffering. These were not just virtues to be rewarded. They were the very substance of her consciousness, and they have allowed her to transition into higher states of being with grace and ease. She is learning, growing, experiencing existence in ways that would seem like paradise to you. And yes, she is aware of you. She holds you in her consciousness the way you hold her in yours. Tears were streaming down my face again, but they felt different now. Not the bitter tears of grief, but something cleaner, almost like relief. Can she hear me when I talk to her? She has always heard you. Every word you spoke to her photograph, every time you stood at her grave and poured out your heart, every silent scream of anguish in the middle of the night. She has been listening, Marcus Webb, and she has been trying to respond in the only ways available to her. The sudden memory of her laughter, the scent of her perfume in an empty room, the dreams where she seems so real, you wake up certain she was just there. These are not coincidences or your imagination. They are communication. Why didn't anyone tell me this? I asked, and there was anger in my voice now. Anger at all the years I'd spent believing she was gone, believing I was alone. Why don't the churches teach this? Why do we get these watered-down stories about clouds and harps and streets of gold when the truth is so much more? I struggled for the word. Real, Ezra supplied. The truth is more real, more vast, more beautiful, and more challenging than the simple stories. And perhaps that is why the stories persist. Humans crave certainty, clear rules, simple divisions between good and evil, saved and damned. The truth requires you to take responsibility for your own consciousness, to recognize that you are creating your experience of reality with every thought, every belief, every choice. That is a frightening freedom for many people. He paused, and I felt something like sadness in his communication. But the cost of simple stories is great. They teach separation when the truth is unity. They teach judgment when the truth is love. They teach that you must wait until death to experience the divine, when the truth is that the divine is present in every moment, in every breath, in every act of compassion and courage and simple human kindness. The light was growing stronger now. I could see the landscape around us. Clearly the scrubland, the highway in the distance, my truck still parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking uselessly. The stars were fading. In another hour it would be full daylight, and the world would wake up to its ordinary routines, unaware that anything impossible had happened here. I don't know if I can believe all this, I said honestly. I want to. God knows I want to. But it's so different from everything I was taught, everything I thought I knew. Ezra made a sound that might have been laughter, though it existed more as a feeling than an audible noise. Then do not believe it. Test it. Observe your own experience. Pay attention to the moments when you feel Sarah's presence. Notice the ways synchronicity operates in your life, the meaningful coincidences, the unexpected help that arrives just when you need it, the thoughts that appear in your mind that feel like they come from outside yourself. Your wife did not have to believe in gravity for it to affect her. Truth does not require your belief to be true. He moved toward an opening in the craft that I hadn't noticed before, a panel that had folded back to reveal an interior lit with that same soft, steady glow. "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. I must. I have been away from my own home longer than intended, and there are those who wait for my return just as Sarah waits for yours. Will I ever see you again? You already know the answer to that question, Marcus Webb. And strangely, I did know, not with my rational mind, but with some deeper part of myself that had learned tonight to listen in new ways. Our paths had crossed for a reason, at precisely the moment both of us needed it. Whether they would cross again didn't matter. What mattered was that they had crossed at all. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me the truth, for giving me hope again. Thank you for your help and for your openness. Not all of your kind would have stopped to help a stranded traveler. Not all would have been willing to hear truths that challenge their certainties. You have a good heart, Marcus Webb." Sarah chose well. He paused at the entrance to his craft, and I felt him gathering himself for something, some final offering. "One more truth before I go," he said, and his presence in my mind felt solemn, weighted with importance. "The grief you carry it is not your enemy. It is the price of love, and it is holy. Do not rush to be free of it. But know this, with every day you live, with every act of kindness you perform, with every broken thing you repair with your skilled hands, you are building a bridge, not away from Sarah, but toward her. The you that you are becoming through this grief, through this transformation, this is the you that will be capable of perceiving her again, first in glimpses and dreams, and eventually, when your own transformation comes, face to face in dimensions beyond the physical. When I die," I said, "will she be there? Will she be the first person I see?" "She will be there. But you will not see her as the first person. You will see her as she truly is, not a separate person, but a unique expression of the same consciousness that expresses itself as you. You will understand then that you were never truly apart, that the separation you felt was only the limitation of physical perception, and in that understanding you will experience a love so complete, so total, that every moment of grief you endured will be revealed as necessary, as the very thing that deepened your capacity to receive such love." The craft was lifting now, silently rising from the scorched earth. Ezra stood at the opening, looking down at me, and I raised my hand in farewell. He raised his in return, and then the opening sealed itself, smoothing into the craft's surface as if it had never been there at all. I stood watching as the vessel rose higher, moving with impossible grace and speed toward the lightening sky. It didn't make a sound. It didn't leave a trail. It just climbed toward the stars that were fading in the approaching dawn. Then it was gone, moving faster than my eyes could follow, vanishing into the vast mystery beyond our little planet. I stood there in the cold morning air, surrounded by scorched earth and the smell of ozone fading into the smell of sage and dust. My toolbox sat at my feet, my wrenches and pliers scattered around it, ordinary tools that had helped repair something extraordinary. My truck still blinked its hazards on the highway. The world was exactly as it had been before, and completely different. I gathered my tools slowly, carefully, giving myself time to absorb what had happened. My hands were steady, my heart felt lighter than it had in 3 years. The sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the high desert in gold and amber, and I watched it rise with wonder I'd forgotten I could feel. I drove home as the world woke up around me, ranchers heading out to check their herds, early morning commuters starting their drives, a world full of ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the universe was so much stranger and more beautiful than they imagined. I didn't blame them. I'd been one of them until a few hours ago. When I got home, I went straight to my workshop. Sarah's photograph still sat on the bench where I'd put it 3 years ago, smiling at me from behind dusty glass. I picked it up and looked at her face. Really looked at it, not with the desperate grief I'd carried for so long, but with something new. Acceptance. Wonder. A tentative, fragile hope. "I met someone tonight," I said to her photograph, and my voice sounded different to my own ears. Stronger. Someone who told me you're not really gone, that you can hear me, that we're still connected. I waited, half expecting to feel foolish, to feel the weight of silence that had met every one-sided conversation I'd had with her memory for 3 years. But instead, I felt warmth. Just a flicker. just the briefest sensation of presence, like sunlight breaking through clouds. And in my mind I heard something that might have been my imagination or might have been something more. A whisper of her voice, or the memory of her voice, or the echo of love that transcends the boundary between worlds. "I've been trying to tell you that for 3 years," it said. "I'm so glad you can finally hear me." I set the photograph back on the bench and looked out the window of my workshop. The sun was fully up now, bright and warm, burning off the last of the night's chill. I had work to do. Equipment to repair. Customers expecting me. The ordinary rhythms of life that would continue whether I'd met an alien named Ezra or not. But everything was different now. The grief was still there. Ezra was right. It wasn't my enemy, and I didn't need to run from it. But alongside the grief was something else. A knowing, a certainty that Sarah was not gone, but transformed. Not lost, but existing in ways I couldn't yet perceive, but would someday understand completely. I thought about what Ezra had said, about building a bridge toward her with every day I lived, with every act of kindness, with every broken thing I repaired. It gave meaning to the days ahead in a way nothing else had for 3 years. I wasn't just surviving until I could be with her again. I was becoming the version of myself capable of truly understanding what we had, what we still have, what we will always have. I went about my day, fixed a tractor for the Hendersons, replaced a starter motor for Old Man Kowalski, made small talk about the weather and the harvest and the upcoming football season. Normal things, human things. But I carried something inside me now that I hadn't carried before. That night, I stood outside my workshop under the stars. They looked different now. Not distant points of light marking my insignificance, but proof of a universe so vast and strange that anything was possible. Somewhere out there, Ezra was traveling home to whatever family waited for him. Somewhere closer, in dimensions I couldn't see but could finally begin to accept, Sarah existed in peace and expanding awareness, holding me in her consciousness the way I held her in mine. And now when I look at the stars, I don't just see distance. I see the space between us getting smaller with every breath I take.